Google DeepMind unveiled Gemini 2.5, number one on the LM Arena leaderboard. OpenAI put a new powerful image generation model into GPT 4.0. Microsoft unveiled two new AI-powered reasoning agents, Researcher and Analyst.
ChatGPT and emotions. How do you feel about empathy as a service? This is an answer that OpenAI and MIT Media Lab are aiming to research and answer.
Tencent introduced Hunyuan T1, a new AI reasoning model that blends the Transformer and Mamba. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek launches a new version of V3. Alibaba announced Qwen 2.5 Omni 7.
How do AI teammates impact the quality of our work and the emotional experience of our work?
Amazon introduced Interests, a generative AI shopping feature.
Could new parental insights from Character.ai enhance teen safety online?
How do you know how smart an AI is? ARC AGI has released a new test for what they call ARC AGI 2.
What if your digital twin lands a modeling job? Who gets paid? H&M clothing retailer is trying to figure that out.
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Kellner.
And I'm Annie Delgado. Hey, Jeff, how are you? Happy spring break?
Thank you. Happy spring break. I'm great. How you doing?
Pretty good. We had an interesting week. My kids are not actually on spring break yet, but interesting week here. It was 80 degrees on Tuesday, pouring rain on Wednesday. And I see you're in a new space. Where are you at?
I am in Hawaii, Big Island. So I brought my kids have a 2-week spring break and they went on a short trip. So we got one week of it here, Monday through Friday in Hawaii. So this is my last day here, but it's been a great trip.
Amazing. What's been the non-AI highlight of your trip to Hawaii?
Non-AI highlights, always in Hawaii snorkeling. We went snorkeling with scooters, like little motors that made me feel like Aquaman under the water. So I could go like 10 miles an hour. It's pretty good. And we swam with the manta rays, which if you're ever in the Big Island in particular, they have a particular setup to swim with the manta rays, which are like, I guess, up to 18 feet across tip to tip of the wing. So they are just enormous, beautiful, elegant creatures under the water. And you get like inches away from these guys and snorkels in the water. So it was a pretty awesome experience.
That sounds incredible.
Also, AI in my life here in Hawaii, I was big on not Apple visual intelligence using Google Lens and ChatGPT live with video, the advanced voice mode you can turn video on. So I was identifying flowers, identifying fish. And then my favorite practical use case for any business person, anybody who travels, was figuring out which Nespresso thing to use to get the coffee I wanted. Because I feel like every hotel has some weird set of colors of these things. And I never know what pod to use. And, snapped a photo or did the live video with ChatGPT advanced voice. And it was able to identify flavors, decaf versus regular, and whether I was supposed to use the espresso or the lungo button on the Nespresso machine is not my favorite way to make coffee, but I feel like I never know what I'm doing to get the cup of coffee I want. And now it did a pretty good job. I got better cups of coffee than normal. So AI in your practical travel life, figuring out which Nespresso pod to use.
That's amazing. That is like truly AI in the wild. You on your vacation, life hack with AI telling you which coffee to make. I love that story.
That is life-changing when you're traveling because bad cups of coffee are very common in hotel rooms with the little, and everybody seems to love these Nespresso machines. I don't know why, but they're like every hotel I'm in now has this thing and I don't love it.
Yeah, they are not my favorite either. I find myself like not knowing which button to click and then I just click all the buttons and then, yeah. So there
AI,
you go.
telling you,
AI?
ChatGPT advanced voice with video tell you which button to press and which pod to use to get the cup of coffee you want. When I go into 12 out of 12 intensity, I'm like, that one's not my cup of coffee. I want a little more in the middle of that.
A little milder. I love it. All right. Well, what do you got for us?
Yeah, let's dive into the AI radar. Lots going on this week. I'll start off with Google. Google DeepMind unveiled Gemini 2.5, the most advanced AI coming out of Google, excelling at complex reasoning, math, science, and coding. Currently number one on the LM Arena leaderboard with just extremely strong performance. There was actually, I saw a Polymarket, like who's going to have the best, most sophisticated AI model. And like nobody had Google's bet. And then all of a sudden one day there's like total betting market flip because this thing just came out of nowhere and absolutely killed it for performance. Currently shipping with a 1 million token context window, but it's supposedly to expand to 2 million. So the ability to throw a lot of documents or video or data. It's a natively multimodal, so it can produce images and video, and it can also consume images and video. Pretty awesome. Available now for Gemini Advanced subscribers and in the Google AI Studio API pricing coming soon. So this was just kind of came out of nowhere with maybe the best model out there for many capabilities.
Well, this is exciting, and actually, I'm glad to see it because you and I have talked several times on the podcast about like what's going on with Google and why are they behind? Gemini's not our favorite, so maybe it'll take the front runner spot here now with this upgrade.
Hopefully, I just hope they can also learn to integrate into products. Another example of failure, that great model, I played with it. It's really good at questions, but I went into the Gemini in Gmail with the itinerary that I was emailed in a PDF for my trip and say, can you turn this into calendar invites and put it on my calendar? And it couldn't, it just
Couldn't
was
do
like
it.
refused. And ChatGPT made an ICS calendar invite with all of the events that I could import into Google Calendar in like 2 seconds. And I was like, Google, come on, guys, you got a great model. I know it's capable. Unlock this potential in context where it's actually useful for me. And in Gmail, you have my Google Calendar. That's all I want. And it couldn't do it.
Got it. Well, few steps forward, but maybe a little bit further to go to actually make it functional.
Productizing work to go. But while we're talking about OpenAI put a new powerful image generation model into GPT 4.0, replacing the integration of DALI 3 for image generation or image modifications. This is a pretty substantial upgrade. It's really remarkable in its ability to generate imagery, um, it- particularly in things like text generation. So these models have really struggled at, you know, a sign that says X. And there's a lot of videos and examples of people doing pretty complicated text that it does really well. But maybe the most popular use case right now is restylizing photos. And the most popular style, apparently, Studio Ghibli. I don't really know why this has become a thing, but if you want your family photo to look like a Studio Ghibli movie, man, you go to ChatGPT and you put it in and say Studio Ghibli eyes this thing, and it's remarkable. And Sam Altman says that they are Studio Ghibli remakes are melting their GPUs right now. It's become so popular, and they're delaying the release of this to free tier users because there's too much demand.
I can't wait to try it out. I tried to try it out this morning and it wasn't capable. I don't know if that was because of the melting GPUs or what, but it had to default to DALL-E. But I can't wait to try it out because I feel like that is one of the biggest drawbacks of OpenAI right now is the image generation is not so great. So hopefully this will be a much needed upgrade to make that actually a useful functionality.
Yeah, I think pretty soon we'll all be generating our presentation images and things out of here. But the restylizing is a lot of fun. I did Studio Ghibli, I did The Simpsons. I took the same family photo and just kind of make it a
Hmm.
Van Gogh painting, make it a Simpson, make it a whatever. And it was really remarkable. And then I actually took a headshot. I've always wanted to have I think they call it head cut, but the Wall Street Journal dot style that they put for people. So I was like,
Yeah,
make it like I was in the journal and give me a headshot that looks like, and it was really good. So you can go get your own stylized version of personal photos, headshots, family photos, whatever. It's a pretty cool tool.
amazing. Are you going to start using your new Wall Street Journal style headshot?
I mean, it's got to be in the right context, right? I don't think it's a good avatar for just like general social media, but maybe I'll put it on my blog and I'll look like I'm a the Wall Street Journal font. I'll look like I'm a Wall Street Journal op-ed writer for all my blogs.
Cool.
Moving on, Microsoft unveiled two new AI-powered reasoning agents. So I thought this was really interesting. They're called Researcher and Analyst, and they're integrated into Microsoft 365 Copilot. And they can leverage internal and external data, third-party integrations like Salesforce, ServiceNow, obviously SharePoint or your Office 365 files to deliver multi-step research. They're built on top of variously O1 and O3 like OpenAI models, but really trying to take that kind of multi-step thinking and reasoning and integrate the sources. I mean, if you think about, hey, I want to analyze data, where is that data coming from? Probably a spreadsheet I have. Maybe it's from my Salesforce. Maybe it's from my Service Cloud. And I want to look at response time to tickets for customer requests. And so really trying to bring in these capabilities of these models into context. So I thought a pretty cool thing and an example again of whether the model is the real differentiator or the ability to bring that model into context with the right personalized set of data to deliver a really high level of capability for users.
Yeah, I thought this was super interesting. I mean, this we were just, contrasting against Google, who is not really investing as much in the product side. This is clearly like a product feature that makes it so much more useful to the actual end user. And you can totally imagine that, it's ingesting all of your data and your emails and your calendar and all this stuff from work. And you have your own personal researcher who can understand the data and gather it from all these different sources and compile it. And then an analyst that can actually drive useful insights from your data, and so it's almost like you just got 2 new fully dedicated staff members to help you understand everything that's going on in your world. So I thought that was really cool feature and maybe not as smart as Gemini's new model, but much more useful and functional in the workplace.
Well, I also think this is a genius of Microsoft's kind of slowly decoupling from OpenAI, where there's a period of time people didn't all notice this, but Satya was saying we're gonna win in AI because we're so tightly integrated with OpenAI and they're training on our stuff, and now they're like we'll use whatever the best model is, doesn't matter. But they're in a position where this Microsoft researcher analyst, if OpenAI doesn't have the best model, if they say hey Gemini is better, they can swap that out on the back end, and that user doesn't need to know. And they're becoming the entry point for the business user to leverage those models, and the place bringing in the data. And so that's a really powerful position for a business owner. If I'm figuring out who I want to leverage, like using Microsoft with all my data integrated, I already have a contract with Microsoft, and then I don't really care whether it's an OpenAI model or they use a DeepSeek model or they use a Google model or they use an Anthropic model. You pick the best model, Microsoft, but just deliver me the capabilities. I think that's a really powerful position for Microsoft and a pretty big change from what people thought about who has the best model being who will win in the space.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll see what they end up selecting and if they do change models over time and how much like does a model become integrated versus just is it possible to just easily and seamlessly swap them out? So that'll be interesting to watch that unfold.
Yeah, it will. A recurring trend here on this podcast has been cheapening model delivery. So this week, Tencent introduced Hunyuan T1, a new AI reasoning model that blends the Transformer and Mamba architecture. This was interesting. It's kind of a new, slightly new architecture, but really focused on boosting processing speeds and cutting computational demands to get the answers. It's not Gemini 2.5 level, but it's kind of matching models like GPT 4.5 or DeepSeek R1, and really better, interestingly, a Chinese language tasks. Again, most of the cutting edge models have been trained on English language, primarily English language data. And so they're a little better at English than they are at foreign languages. So this better at Chinese language. But I thought it was really interesting. After this announcement, Kai-Fu Lee came out and said Sam Altman at OpenAI is, quote, probably not sleeping well, as the costs of these models from places like Tencent or others, Alibaba, are just order of magnitude, sometimes 2 orders of magnitude less expensive. And they're switching, Kai-Fu Lee, formerly at Google, Google Brain, is running a startup in China on AI. And so we're switching over our models, and that can't be good for OpenAI to feel like everybody's switching to different models that are almost as capable, but way, way, way cheaper. So interesting to see that trend just continuing.
Yeah, it is interesting. I guess that's why we see Sam doing things like writing letters to the White House saying, well, let's try to make sure people use US-based AI models.
That's right. Continuing on that theme, Chinese AI startup DeepSeek launches a new version of V3. We talked about this, the kind of first cutting edge model before the R1 reasoning model built on top of R3. 641 gigabyte size, it built to run on high-end personal computers. A personal computer might be stretching it. They're talking about Apple's Mac Studio, which is like, I want to say a $10,000 or $20,000 personal computer.
Personal
But
computer.
sort of a workstation, right? It is not a data center. It is running on a workstation, using a mixture of experts. Activates just 37 billion parameters per token, so kind of a lot smaller than the kind of almost trillions of tokens we talked about for some of these cutting edge models. Really gonna, I mean, here both cutting compute costs and increasing speed, but also questioning what kind of devices will we be actually deploying models on? Will it be on your personal device? Will it be on an internal server at a company? Will it have to come from an OpenAI or a Google data center? This really kind of changing the equation there. And they open source this under a permissive MIT open source license. So this not only available from DeepSeek, but actually out there available as open source that people can download and put on whatever devices they want. So just continuing the trend of cheaper, smaller, highly capable models that can be deployed anywhere. And a lot of them now coming out of China, not the cutting edge research, but this kind of distillation of models down to a smaller size.
Yeah, interesting.
And the last, we got to keep going on this trend. Sorry, it's a week of it. But Alibaba announced Qwen 2.5, Omni 7B. These guys, I need more help with naming than even the Silicon Valley guys do. But this is a 7 billion parameter multimodal AI model. So this one, not only could you run on data on like Mac Studios, but potentially even on things like smartphones. So just an even smaller size model, really good at real-time tasks, at language generation, speech understanding, highly capable model for the kinds of things you might want to do on a phone, understanding natural language, responding in natural language. Also open source, available on Hugging Face and GitHub. So interesting to see just a lot of developments in Chinese companies bringing lower cost to highly capable models, bringing smaller size to those models, allowing them to run on laptops, on high-end workstations, or even down on smartphones. I think it really could change the nature of how we see these things being deployed.
Yeah, the sort of distribution through open source mechanisms, I think, is like a real business question that I think business leaders have to wrestle with as they think about deploying AI safeguards in their company. Do they want to allow open source model usage? Do they want to have it be more controlled in a more sort of enterprise environment? And I think that these models are faster and cheaper and can be deployed on different types of devices, et cetera. But will they really be as commercially adopted as things like OpenAI, where there is like a clear, safe enterprise use case, is a question that I think remains to be answered.
Well, if you look at the history of the internet, it seems like So most of the internet today runs on an open source operating system called Linux that runs the servers behind almost all, a lot of these companies, as well as almost all internet services that people leverage. And I think people came to the realization over time that the open source nature of it made it more scalable, more robust, more secure, because you had a lot more eyes looking for the bugs, the problems, the challenges. And so I imagine there'll be a period of time where the safeguards, the fine tuning, the guardrails are probably better in the closed source models where you've got a team really dedicated to building it. But over time, the open source likely will have those guardrails available. You'll have more pushing and prodding, and you'll have more flexibility in how you want to deploy. So it would not shock me to see open source models, particularly for internal deployment for a Microsoft building on, how they're going to develop a research or an analyst, or an internal company building their own chatbot that's customer facing, to find these, at least so in the medium term, really capable and very robust. Probably in the near term, you're kind of going, I don't know what's in there. There could be all sorts of stuff. It's a huge thing. I don't have the capability of looking at it, but the open source has a history of producing really robust, reliable platforms over time. And to the extent you see LLMs as a platform upon which to build, I imagine that could be some really strong competitors in that space.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Well, speaking of deploying AI in your business, let's move on to AI in the wild and talk about teamwork. So, how do AI teammates impact the quality of our work? And interestingly, the emotional experience of our work. So, this is a pretty fascinating study conducted by Harvard, and they were looking at teams at Procter and Gamble involving 776 professionals, and they basically took these guys and they broke them into four distinct groups: some individual contributors, some team collaborators, and then some individual contributors that had an AI assistant or teammate that they could use on their project, and then some teams with AI teammates that they could use on their project. And what they found was pretty surprising. They found that human teams, obviously, I think we know this already, human teams perform better than individual contributors on some sort of creative task. However, individual contributors with an AI teammate, so being able to leverage AI, perform just as well as the teams. But interestingly, the teams powered by a combination of human teammates and AI teammates outperformed everybody significantly. And so those teams had better results. They had more sort of creative outputs, more interesting product ideas, etc. But interestingly, at the end, when they sort of interviewed all of these humans about their experience in the study, these guys also reported a better sort of emotional experience at delivering the response. They were more engaged, they were more enthusiastic, they were more, felt empowered and creative in sort of the product work and the design work that they were doing. So I thought that was a super fascinating outcome from this study.
This study had a lot of super fascinating outcomes. I felt that was the emotional response. Do you have a takeaway from that? It was really, I didn't know what to make of, like, working with AI gave a better emotional resonance to the experience than working without AI. That was not at all what I expected.
Yeah, I didn't expect it either, and so I sort of started to imagine why might this be the case, and I think that one theory that I have is that it sort of levels the playing field in a way. So if you are, one thing that happens at work is imposter syndrome. I know a lot of people struggle with this, where you're in a team, maybe there's 5 people and you don't have all the information as somebody else on the team, or maybe you're a little bit more junior than somebody else on the team, or maybe, this, that, or the other thing, you have a different perspective. And all of those things make it so that you're afraid to sort of speak up. Having an AI sort of teammate that you can bounce ideas off of, and they can tell you like, well, this is the counter argument, and here's how you might think about that, and here's a good question to ask, kind of empowers you to maybe speak up and use your voice a little bit more, because you can vet some of those ideas somewhere outside of the spin cycle of your own brain. So I think that was one thing that comes about as a result of this. And then I think the other thing, which the study didn't talk about, so this is purely my own conjecture, but I think people feel more excited and engaged when they feel like they're truly learning something new. And so part of the thing that was interesting about this study was that at the beginning, they gave a whole pretty robust training session to all the people that were going to use the AI teammates, to explain to them, this is how you get the most effective use out of the AI. This is how, you know, th- try to think about the AI as a teammate and not just as a Google, right? Think about it as somebody that you're collaborating with and you're bouncing ideas off of. Ask it to push you, from different, give you product feedback from different sort of lenses and that type of thing. And so I think that component of just the experience of trying something new makes people more excited. They don't feel like they're doing the same mundane tasks that they do all the time at work. They feel like they're learning and growing, and so I think that probably also helped the emotional experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also what I wonder too is if that teammate has a good if you think about chatbots are kind of designed today to be helpful and a little bit non-judgmental. And so I wonder if they're kind of a really good teammate. They're not gonna go, what the hell are you talking about? They're gonna have a nice emotional, kind of even cadence, open to ideas, very helpful and suggestive, and kind of like the way you would want a teammate to be, which it's always sometimes even having one person on a team that way can help level the dynamics a lot. And I wonder if there's some like they're just designed to be helpful and inquisitive and to kind of work with you in a way that's like better than some human teammates can be.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I think the big takeaways for people, well, number one takeaway for me, I almost always use AI as an individual contributor today. I don't usually use it in a team dynamic where multiple people are interacting. So that's something I want to try because I think that was interesting. I think the other thing, and we've talked about this before, which is that if you are using AI, don't think about it as a computer system or as a tool. Think about it as either a teammate or as a employee that you're going to be giving ongoing feedback to, and that system is going to learn from your feedback, right? So if it doesn't quite get something right, give it the feedback of where you disagree or what you saw differently so that it can learn over time and become more effective as you
Yeah.
continue to leverage it. And I think that's something that a lot of times, people don't maybe think to do. They just go and like want to grab an answer really quick, but it's helpful to engage in your feedback on the answer and whether it actually like met the mark or not.
Yeah, and giving it the context of what role you want it to play, what considerations you want it to take into account really helps it improve the quality of answers. The other two things that were really interesting from the quality results of this to me were that the teams with AI were marginally better on average than the teams without AI, but that the absolute best answers by far came from the teams with AI. It's the kind of top 10% best solutions as rated on quality by people at Procter Gamble, which I think really tells you how much value there is at being a pro, at being a really capable user of AI. That to me feels like the teams that took the best use of AI figured out how to find the absolute best solution. So the returns on your ability to use AI effectively are very high. And the other thing that was really interesting is that the technical versus business side, they kind of rated the solutions based on how technical and how business capable they were. And the teams with AI kind of erased the difference between like business users working with AI gave a more well-rounded technical solution, and technical users of AI gave a more business savvy solution than individuals. So it kind of like leveled out the business capability, which again, when you think about using this as a teammate or partner, they can fill the gaps in your knowledge or experience base really well. So if you say, I'm a really technical guy, but I need some help on marketing or product positioning or whatever, they can really fill your gaps. And it really showed that the solutions that came out of this were more well-rounded than those by teams or individuals that were singularly kind of one set of capabilities or experiences and skill levels. So that was a really interesting finding that you can really augment yourself or your team with capabilities you don't have by asking the AI to play that role.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, shall we move on to shopping? I talked about using AI here for Nespresso. Amazon's new AI-powered interest feature, can they transform the way you shop for your passions? We're going to
Mm.
find out. So Amazon introduced Interests, which is a generative AI shopping feature designed to proactively identify and recommend new products that are aligned with personalized prompts that you give it. So you can describe your interests, things you're looking for, and it's basically going to go and watch for new products that are out there and say, hey, this might be scary. I'm a little concerned about everybody in my family having access to something like this. But to me, this was a really interesting example of moving AI out of the reactive responsive mode. Hey, I'm going to go to the AI when I need something and actually giving it that agentic, like, here's a thing I want you to do in the world independent of me and come find me when there's something interesting. And we've all have passions you have, things you're kind of going, where do I find the latest X or Y or Z? I want to know. So this was to me, a really interesting example of, again, moving from that kind of reactive, like find me the best X to, hey, Jeff, I know you're really interested in Y. Like, here's a new one that could be interesting for you.
Yeah, well, I had equal parts maybe excitement and terror at this because the last thing I need in my life is on getting smarter about telling me what to buy because I
You
feel
might
like it's
also like,
you might also like I don't need more of that in my life, but at the same time also sometimes they just get it wrong where like you search for something one time and all of a sudden it thinks you want 30 of those things and you're like, "No, that's kind of a one-time purchase. I don't need 30 other advertisements because I purchased the one thing." So it great that it's gonna get smarter, but also I hope it doesn't get too smart.
yeah, we'll see. It could be quite dangerous, but I love the idea of I'm looking for a new X. Like, I haven't found one. To your point, like I look at the five you recommended. I did not buy them. That should tell you that don't just keep advertising, but like, tell me when there's a new one. Like, tell me when there's a thing that might meet the need that I have that's not being met, or that, I'm looking for a better version of X. So we'll see how that plays out. But I did think for all of our listeners, like that idea of how do I take AI and apply it turn it into a proactive agent for my customers, for my employees, for different user sets, as opposed to here's a teammate you can go to when you need them, as a really interesting use case to think about how you can build on in your own business, in your own life. I use ChatGPT tasks for things like this, where it's looking for things for me, and every week it's sending me a summary of X or Y or Z. So that kind of reactive to proactive shift is one to think about how you can leverage in your own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the topic of advertising, the next story we're going to talk about here is pretty fascinating. What if your digital twin lands a modeling job? Who gets paid? You or the twin? Well, H&M, clothing retailer, is trying to figure that out. And so basically what they have done is, they have all these models that do their photo shoots to show off their clothes. They have taken some of their probably best performing models and created basically digital copies of this model. So it's the model's likeness, but they can digitally reproduce, an advertisement with that model wearing different types of clothes. And of course, this cuts down on things like in studio time, lighting, photography, etc., all of the things that go into a photo shoot to show off the newest clothing line. So it cuts down on, the speed to generate the advertisement, but then of course also the cost. So lots of implications here, but some of the interesting questions to dig into are like, how does the model get paid? I think it's pretty clear that they've said it's pretty clear that if the digital twin is in an advertisement, the actual human gets paid for whatever that
Probably
content
not the
is.
same as doing a new I mean, it's probably got to be a little different. You're cutting down
Yeah,
the value, the amount of labor involved for that person in being in new photo shoots. I
that's
don't know
right.
what that
So
looks like.
how much do they get paid? They get something. What about who owns the rights to the digital twin? Is it the person who it's a twin of, or does the company that made the digital twin own the rights to use that image perpetually? That's an interesting question we could maybe dig into. And then lastly, what about the ethics of all of the lighting and photographers, et cetera, that are impacted by cutting down on some of these sort of traditional jobs that always go into these types of things? So a lot of fascinating questions that H&M is bringing to the forefront through the use of their AI.
So what are the answers? Lay it on me, Annie.
I
How
don't
should they be
know.
paying? How should they be charging? What's the answer to these tough questions?
I don't know the answer to the questions. I think maybe my feeling is that your digital copy of yourself should belong to you. Similar to like I'm very much on the Taylor Swift that artists should own their own music rather than a separate company owning the music because that is their content. I feel like your photo of you should belong to you, and so and H&M takes my picture and makes a copy, which they've never asked me, of course, but if they take my picture and make a copy, I should be able to, decide how often that gets used or what use cases it gets used or whether they sell it, right? Like, what if H&M now, if they own this copy of your digital clone and then they can sell it to another company that maybe you don't like reputationally or something like that, maybe they don't stand for something you believe in, you should be able to make those choices about your likeness. That is my thought. I don't know. What are your thoughts? These are complicated questions.
They're complicated questions. I tend to agree. I think the digital twin ought to be owned by the individual in some way, shape, or form. And I imagine that the questions you're talking about are not uncommon. Like, how often can you use this advertisement? Where can you place it? Those are things that often would be in, I think, a modeling contract. Never been asked either, so I haven't signed any modeling contract. I don't have a lot of experience with the ins and outs of the restrictions of the copyright that's granted for an image. But I do imagine that people will own these. The question of the labor, I mean, I'm a big believer that the market will settle out the, lighting people and the grips and the camera folks like that. There may be some less demand, but it's also a real possibility that, um, there becomes some real high quality in having a human version of a shoot that becomes a stamp of things that you put on certain advertisements or images versus the AI generated. And that, that really more people, H&M's a big company, but there's lots of people who would love to have their goods, lots of people on Etsy who'd love to have their goods in a photo shoot. And the idea that you could now do that with much lower cost, you could expand access to better versions of product photography or in situ photography for different kinds of capabilities. And I think that's a really interesting expansion of the market that could happen. The really fascinating question to me is what happens when you don't need I mean, like, you don't really need a person now. I would imagine you could generate this digital twin. You'd be a digital human that's not based on anybody, but it's kind of based on everybody to the extent that you have images of yourself that were in some version of a training data set that was generated. And like, who has the right or a lack of right to use such an image, given that many people probably contributed to the ability of a model to generate such a human likeness, and yet no specific person is being kind of mirrored or copied. You see lots of these images online right now. This is not a real person, in a lot of social media where people just use the image generation. What happens when you can generate a whole human and put them in a photo shoot? Who owns the rights to that? Or maybe nobody. I don't know. That'll be I think even a harder question because it eliminates entirely the need for any sort of model to create the digital twin at all.
Yeah, well, and it's sort of related to the stuff we were talking about last week about the copyright suggestions and the creative types that were pushing back on some of the suggestions that Sam Altman made, which is like, Sam Altman is arguing that when we ingest all of this data, we generate something completely new and we transform it into something that's completely new. And that's unlike your original art form that got used in the training data. Well, how much of the transformation makes you a model that is a sort of digital twin versus something new? And what is the sort of percentage of likeness that has to evolve? Because you can imagine it's not going to be a far leap between now and when, okay, I use this model as my base, but then I tweak this, that, or the other thing to, fit my need. And then is it still the digital twin or is it some other thing entirely? And where that line is I think entirely unclear right now, and that's part of the need for the clarity of the sort of copyright standards that folks are asking for.
Yeah, but I also think, as we've said many times, it points to the fact that there are technology agnostic laws that really apply. Like, take the Studio Ghibli reformatting example. There are artists who can take your image and turn them into a Studio Ghibli style version, right? That are drawing. And there is copyright law that states when that's legal, when you're copying the form, and you can't just go selling Studio Ghibli art, branding it as Studio Ghibli art, even if you're not licensed by Studio Ghibli. Same thing for any kind of well recognized style of an artist. There is an element to this that is new, but there's also, and the copyright implications of training on data for the building of a model that generates things is new. But also, a lot of what you really need to regulate are the outputs. And in many ways, AI may enable a larger volume of outputs, but they're not substantially changing the style of outputs that are capable. And so the copyright law does not have to be like, here's how we deal with AI copies. It's like, no, what happens if I restylize an image that is noticeably like some other artist that's famous? Like, do I have the right to do that and sell it or not? And what's the implication? And that's a real a question that can be very technology agnostic. And I always think regulations are best when we think of them in terms of the impact of the output and not the mechanism used to create the output. And acknowledging that the technology can change the potential volume of such output such that the balance may shift, right? Of, well, that's so little of an issue, we don't have to regulate it if artists copying a style. And now you're going, oh, no, it's like trivially easy to create. That changes the balance between the creator and the copying or the restylizing, but it doesn't require you to think about the technology being used to do that restylization. I think that'll be where the best regulations will be, acknowledging the impact on the volume or the capability of output, but not regulating specifically the technology that's used to do it. But what is your right to restylize an image or to create an image that looks like someone, and how do you that should be kind of agnostic of what technology you use to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. If regulation chases technology, it will always be behind. So you want to have it sort of more philosophical in nature so that it actually can remain true over a longer period of time. Continuing on a similar thread, we're going to move into our AI alignment section and talk about ChatGPT and emotions. So, how do you feel about empathy as a service? That is my question. This is an answer that OpenAI and MIT Media Lab or a question I should say that they're aiming to research and answer. So they conducted a study analyzing about 40 million user interactions with ChatGPT and explored how these interactions affected the emotional well-being of the person using it. The findings were that only a small percentage of users actually appear to develop some sort of an emotional bond with ChatGPT, but those who are developing an emotional bond have increased feelings of loneliness and emotional dependency relative to people who are not. Women in particular were found to report slightly less social interaction after interacting with the GPT or with the chatbot rather. And so again, this is a very complex questions about the interaction between human and AI, and especially when you sort of cross into sort of emotional or psychological impacts of that interaction. How should we think about this? Is this good for the world? Is it bad for the world? Lots of complex question here. Any initial reactions before we dive into it?
I mean, I'm really happy that that they're researching this, that OpenAI is engaging with academic institutions like MIT to look at this question. We talked about some of the character AI and the chatbots that are kind of oriented around emotional bonds.
Mhm.
I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this still is very much like an analysis of what happens when her becomes real. Like, I feel very much like this is in the vein of that movie. And I'm sure that it's a small number of users who are connecting with them in an emotional way now, but it seems inevitable that either through conscious design choices of some number of AI companies or just through increased user familiarity and comfort with connecting with these bots will become larger. And we already have what's often described as a loneliness epidemic in America. Like, I feel like there's a design choices that can be made to make these bots make you less lonely and connect you with the real world, and design choices that can be like a social media style rabbit hole that just totally isolates you into a little world that feels very small. And it'll be really, I'm glad they're studying, because I feel like they can solve this and make this a more productive force for people to be happier. But it's going to take conscious design choices, and it starts with understanding the problem. And so this made me quite optimistic that there is effort to kind of find a better path forward for this.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're thinking about it because I do think it's really important, and I do think honestly, like, candidly, it is what social media got wrong, right? The initial sort of promise of social media was that people were gonna feel more connected, and actually, it's led to all kinds of other things. People feel less connected. They feel like they have more FOMO because, so and so
Okay.
down the street is doing X thing, and I'm not doing that, and, I think it is all else equal made people more lonely. You can kinda see the impact that it has on teenagers relative to, the social media free lifestyles that we enjoyed as teenagers. You can see it play out really clearly, and so I'm glad that with the AI, companies, OpenAI in particular, that they're thinking about how to solve the problem. My initial reaction was maybe a little bit draconian because it was, like, clearly emotional connect clearly it's bad, like, this should not be a thing, but then I started to think about there might be some use cases where it is good, right? If you think about somebody who's really struggling and they're afraid to reach out to a human for help, but there is that judgment-free zone where you can reach out to an AI for help. If the AI responded in a helpful way, that could be something that would be a net positive. But again, how do you sort of draw the line between making sure that it's only used for the good use cases and not misused? Seems
Mm.
like an almost impossible thing to do because as long as the capability is there, there will be the ability to exploit it or use it inappropriately. And so it's a challenging set of questions, I think.
Yeah, I also a believer that we have to accept that there's going to be risks, and not just risks, problems. That there will be bad outcomes for any of these technologies, as there are for any technology, and that the goal isn't and can never be to prevent a bad outcome, a person from becoming overly emotionally attached to a chatbot, like Joaquin Phoenix's character and her falls in love
Yeah.
with the chatbot. But how do you minimize that, right? Because there's lots of people who are lonely today, not the fault of a chatbot, and so you got to look at that balance of, can we design these things so that in the vast majority of use cases, they're a positive force. That when you ask for that emotional connection, hey, when's the last time you hung out with your friends? Pointing you towards better solutions, real world connections, like real community. And they have to accept that there will be places where that goes awry, where people abuse it, where people will fall into rabbit holes. But you got to look at the balance of those things, and not just the how do we prevent it in all cases this thing from happening, because there are a lot of good, right? There are a lot of lonely people who can find an emotional connection and use that as a on ramp to, I think, a healthier real life community. And these chatbots can actually be used that way. So it'll be interesting to see the design choices that people make and how they try and find that balance.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. This is not related to AI, but maybe sort of technology generally helping with these sorts of issues. I knew a person at an earlier phase of my life whose partner was agoraphobic and had not left the home in something like 15 or 20 years. And then when Uber became a thing, she encouraged her partner to try driving Uber because with Uber, they could safely go from their home to their car, never having to leave their car, but actually get out in the real world. And so this person tried that and started just taking some short trips on Uber and had the first real like social interactions with human beings that they had had in, over a decade. And it was really helpful to help them sort of start to bridge the gap to work on some of these things. And anyway, and I just remember hearing this story and being so fascinated by it. So there is, you can imagine with the chatbot, a similar type of thing of somebody who has been afraid to put themselves out there, afraid to develop a, emotional connection with a human, afraid to, initiate a conversation to sort of have a practice ground to be able to do that and start to ease into it. So I can see in that type of situation that it could be it could be potentially useful. But what I don't want to see is every teenager just in their room talking to chatbots and not to each other for the rest of time. Because even when you go out to dinner with teenagers and they're all on their phone, and there's like five teenagers parallel playing, looking at their phone, and it takes you have to be very involved as a parent to say, let's put those down and let's talk to each other. Like, how was
Yeah,
your day? Right?
it's
So,
very hard with the group of teen. We have a hard rule of no devices at the table for meals at our house. But then when you're out with other people and the kids are sitting at a table and everybody else pulls out their phone, your kid's looking at you like, yeah. Hopefully that at least they're talking to humans. I guess now you know what the worst thing could be than all of them talking to each other over text at the dinner table, which is like talking to their own chatbots.
oh my gosh, that's so depressing that the good old days when teenagers were just on their phones talking to other humans. But
The dystopia is coming for us. Black Mirror could be real.
oh my
Well,
goodness.
we'll move on now to how do you know how smart an AI is? ARC AGI has released a new mechanism or a new test for what they call ARC AGI 2 that's evaluating how smart AIs are. They these are really they're interesting like little visual puzzles that you have to solve. And this is they're really trying to find a way to define how smart these models are in a more practical way. With tests, they actually used 400 humans to test all of their things, and every problem had to be solved by at least two humans. And it's interesting. They ARC AGI 1, which came out earlier. I think the highest level score is like 70, 60 or 70% for like O3. And now here they're down to like 4 or 5% on ARC AGI 2. So much more kind of complex, multi-step reasoning, symbolic interpretation. But the fascinating thing about these metrics to me is there's so many metrics, and every time there's a new model, it's best on this and that, and this leaderboard and that leaderboard, and it's fascinating to think about how because one of the things ARC talks about is actually having these tests influence the development. Like if you want your chatbot to be number one on this thing, what do I have to do? And so that was a really interesting question to me of how do the measurements that gain traction in the industry end up driving the priorities for development and how we think about what a good or bad, capable or less capable model is, and are we comfortable with what those tests are saying? What those right now there's so many that are around language or coding or math. Like, can you take the science Olympiad test? And I kind of go, when I meet a person, I don't. The first thing I go is not like, why don't you take the International Science Olympiad test and tell me what percentage you score, and I'll see how smart you are. And I know very smart people that would do badly, and you know people that would do really well that would do very poorly in like a job setting or whatever. So it was really interesting to see them talk about that, and it made me start thinking about like what are the right metrics for success or capabilities of a model, and are we pointing ourselves in the right direction as we kind of endorse or look at different kind of metrics for how good a chatbot is.
Yeah, I know this is fascinating to sort of see. One of the things that I was interested is that they found sort of the best performing, we talk about every week models getting smarter and so on and so forth, but the best performing models score about 10% compared to humans 98%. And so it really tells you actually as smart as they are in terms of just a repository of information, they're not actually smart in terms of like intelligence, and they're going to soon be the robot overlords. There's like a pretty far distance that they need to travel to get there. And so I started trying to think about like, well, why is that? And really what it comes down to is like the AI systems are like that kid you knew in high school that was really book smart and could regurgitate everything from a textbook, but that had no common sense, right? Like, so like one of the examples it used was, a puzzle that was presented to an AI where the symbols were a red square and a green circle. And there was no instructions about what to do, but humans sort of automatically put them in a certain pattern, whereas the AI couldn't do that. And it's because humans have this context that red means stop and green means go, that the AI didn't even consider, right? Like it wouldn't even have considered that this particular color and shape is indicative of some concept that of a verb, right? Like it's an of course it just sees a shape with a color or whatever. And so I thought that was super fascinating to think about with all of the talk about how much they're advancing. We're really still far from general intelligence.
Yes. I think that's right, and I think the harder part than the book smart kid without street smarts that you knew in high school, and we all know that, but is that what their common sense is that they're lacking or the street smarts is hard to define and varies so much. And so, when you're thinking about where you use these in the real world, there are things that are, 100% 100% accurate, and then there are things that are, 50% accurate. And so, when you're thinking about where you use these in the real world, there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, and then there are things that are 50% accurate, that are book smart, that what that line is and where they're going to be really incredibly smart and where they're going to be really incredibly not smart. Kind of the perfect example back from the days when, the models couldn't count the number of R's in strawberry. And that's why they nicknamed one like super intelligent PhD level capabilities in math and coding, but it can't count R's in strawberry. Not as it can now count R's in strawberry. So that's better. But I do think that's an example of like, you just don't really know where that shortcoming is. And it's just a reminder to anybody deploying these systems to be really cognizant that it can be like super amazingly intelligent in certain ways. And then all of a sudden have just this blind spot that you didn't see coming, and figuring out where those are and what they are and how you test for them to make sure that, because it's very different than a human where you go, oh, if they're capable of doing X, Y, Z, clearly they're going to be capable of doing A, B, C. And where you can kind of understand from a human intelligence capability where that is true and not true. I think for AI models, it's not always true that when they can do X, Y, Z, they can clearly do A, B, C. And so our intuition about what capabilities in a certain realm mean for capabilities in another realm may not be accurate. And that's one of those areas where I think you got to be really careful when you're thinking about how you deploy or test or put guardrails on an AI in production, is like, being cognizant. And, one of the first things I would do is ask an AI where might, the shortfalls of a model like this come from? What are the things I should be testing for, looking at? Because they're actually pretty intelligent about those things. That's a book smart kind of question. But that distinction between book smarts and street smarts, I feel like is intuitively go, oh yeah, I know what that distinction is. I know, but here I think that distinction is much harder to understand what falls on which side of the line and where those blind spots are.
Yeah, there you go. Human oversight is still quite important when you're deploying AI in your organization.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, we got one more story we can cover really quick, and actually, it's maybe related to the conversation we were just having about teens just a second ago. So, could new parental insights from Character.ai enhance teen safety online? So, Character AI is one of those chatbots we've talked about where a person can actually interact with a specific AI that they have sort of customized to be a character that they want to interact with. There's been a number of sort of safety concerns raised about this type of functionality and what it will do, particularly to younger users who maybe have a propensity to develop an overly emotional attachment to this type of technology. So, what the company has done is two things. First of all, it's released a sort of teen safe model that's specific for under 18 use cases and will sort of prohibit some of the sort of overly adult content that we might be concerned about our teens being exposed to. And then the second thing that it does is it gives a new parental control feature where the parent can actually see the number of not only the number of hours that the teen is spending interacting with the app, but also what specific characters they're interacting with and for how much time. So it can see a parent can see and observe sort of over time how much time they're spending time with this character versus that character. Again, lots of interesting questions here. How do we sort of feel about the risks of sort of the emotional connections between a teen and an AI? Does the parental oversight really help in this context once you're sort of down a rabbit hole or not? Is there privacy implications on the teens? Like, I don't usually track how many hours my teen is spending talking to one friend versus another. Is that different as an AI? And is my responsibility as a parent sort of different in terms of the tracking? So, lots of interesting questions here for parents to sort of be wrestling with as we're getting into this new world.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's certainly disclosure to parents, good first step. Kind of like screen time to me for on my phone, my kids' phones, like how much time are they spending? What are they spending it on? I don't look at
Mm,
my friend, but I do look at which apps they're on. I think probably a good point are things like block apps or prevent
yeah.
apps if I find apps to be particularly problematic. And I would, I'm worried about privacy, but I also think parents at some level have a right. And so that it will be interesting to see where companies find their own responsibility. I also hope this doesn't become a like, well, I'm not responsible for making sure the chats are safe, because like I gave the parents the knowledge. Now the parents are on it because these tools are, not totally there. And even if I had access to the chats, I don't know that I would want to look at like that. It feels like an invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it may come to where you want to have the ability to do it. Because if you see something problematic, you go, all right, kids like really addicted to some interaction, some character. Like, how do I see if that's safe and healthy or not? It will be an interesting space. Feels like monitoring social media, but kind of on steroids. Same kind of problems exist in the real world with kids chatting with people online, but now you've got chatting with fake people online. So
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think, um, the the parental controls don't actually involve the parent being able to see the specific chat history. It's really just like the time spent. But I think there is an interesting follow-on question of like the company can see that. And if the company sees some sort of concerning behavior or something indicative of somebody about to commit a crime or about to hurt themselves or that type of thing, should the company have some sort of disclosure requirement or not? I think is another sort of interesting question that is yet unanswered.
Yeah, I think that, will they need to tell the parents if certain things, thresholds are met? Or could I just say, like, then, and they kind of like the Amazon example of proactive versus reactive. Can you tell me if my kid crosses any of these kinds of lines that I should start to be concerned or not? So I
Yeah,
have some understanding of what's out there and some ability to actually ask for where the lines I care about being drawn are and what I can see and when I want to know and when I just want to be like, hey, it seems to be in the normal realm. So lots of opportunities to use AI to improve our oversight and visibility into this stuff. So hopefully we'll see some new developments in that direction.
that's true. Oversight of AI and oversight of your teens.
Yes. Well, I feel like AI might be easier to oversee than teams, but I don't know.
I think so.
All right. Well, this was a great chat, Annie, and I will see you for the next episode next week.
All right, good to see you. Have a great weekend.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message and we do our best to cover them all on the show.